Today we're going to set up a landing page for our websites. We need to first clone our repository. There are many different repositories we've made in this series, but this time we're going to go back to the very first one. That is our username.github.io. This is a special repository that is at the root level of our custom domain. So before you start everything, make sure in Visual Studio Code that you have closed all your folders, so you only have the welcome screen open. Then click on the source control button, and instead of open folder, what we want to do is click clone repository. Then up at the top, it'll give you an option, clone from GitHub. You will see all the repositories that you've created at GitHub, and what we're looking for is the one that is your username.github.io. Go ahead and click that. Now you have to choose a location for your repository. I would put it wherever you're keeping all your website files. For this, I'm going to click the desktop, and here are all my other files, and I'll select repository location. You can go ahead and click open, and this will open it in Visual Studio Code. And this should look familiar. We have our CNAME file. This is the file that GitHub makes to have your custom domain. We have the default README file, and we have the index file that is Hello World. Now we have everything on our local repository, and we can now make changes and sync up to GitHub. Before we get started, we need to go to our File Explorer. And if I go to my desktop, you can see now I have my new repository that I just cloned. But I also have an IMG and a video folder. Both of these have images and a video that I've prepared for this tutorial. You will have your own images and videos. I need to put these folders into that new repository folder. Now I have my images and my video inside that folder. You can see them, they show up in Visual Studio Code. Before we get started, we need to get a couple of the tools that we need. In a web browser, type glightbox, click on the first link, and then click download. Save the file and open the archive. Inside glightbox, go into the distribution folder, go into the CSS and JavaScript folders. And what you want to do is you can just drag the CSS folder into Visual Studio Code, and we're just going to copy the folder. And we have these two CSS files. And then we're going to go back to the distribution folder, and we're going to move the JavaScript folder over, and we will copy the folder as well. Now, back in your browser, type Font Awesome. Click on Font Awesome, and click on Start for Free, and then click Download. The same thing, click Open with Archive or unzip it. Inside the Font Awesome, there are a couple things that we need. First, the Web Fonts folder. You can drag the entire Web Fonts folder over into Visual Studio Code and click Copy Folder. The next thing to do is twirl out the CSS folder, and there are many CSS files. We only need one. We need all.min.css. So we can drag this over into the CSS folder of our page. And then if it opens that file, it's okay. Just click the X. We don't need to do anything with it. And since we've made so many changes, we can click on source control and we can say added needed files. And we can click the check mark. And that will commit those changes so we can always come back to right where we need to be. So if I click on my files now, I still have my original index.html, but I also have my images, I have the Lightbox JavaScript, I have a video, and I have this Web Fonts folder that is for Font Awesome. Now it's time to get started with coding our new homepage. The first thing I'm going to do is delete Hello World. Then I'm going to press exclamation point and press enter. So we can change our title, and then we need to add in our style sheets. So first we can type link, and then the style sheet that we need is css/styles.css. We need to make this style sheet. Next, we can type link, and then we can type, don't forget to put the CSS in the front. And then we need to add the Font Awesome CSS. So we'll type link again, and then CSS, and then the all.min.css. Great, so now we have all our style sheets. We might as well go ahead and make a new file called styles.css. This is our style sheet that we will be using. But back in the index page, we still need to add some content. So inside the body, the first thing we're going to do is add a class to our body because we want to be able to tell which page that we're on as we go. And that way we can style the body different ways depending on what page we are on. So we're going to type class equals hero body. We're calling it hero because we're going to have a large full screen image on our landing page so people can really see our portfolio work. Then we need to add a header, but we need to add a class to this. So we're going to type header, then we're going to use the Emmet shortcut, press period, then type hero box. This is going to be the main box that holds our header content. Inside that, we need to add our large image. So we're going to say section.hero box. Inside this, we're going to have an image, img, with a class of, and for the source, we're going to type img / and for this one, I'm going to use ocean.jpg. And then we always want to add an alt. So now we have the image that we're going to use. So now the next section, we need to add our navigation. And this navigation is going to be a little different than the navigation we've used before because we're going to add social media icons with Font Awesome. So we will still start with nav. By pressing 2 periods, we can add 2 classes to our nav right away. You don't have to do it that way, but it can save you time. So inside our nav, we need to add our logo. So I'll type H1. And then inside the logo, I'm going to type my name. I don't want to just type the name. I want to make sure it's a link. So I'll type A. And then this is going to go to index.html. And then inside the link text, I will put my name. After this H1, we want to add a UL with a class of nav menu. Then we want to add an LI with a class of nav item. And then we want to add links inside our nav items. So I'll type A. And this one, we're going to have go to portfolio. And for the link text, I'll type portfolio. I can either copy these or type them new. I'm just going to copy it twice. And then for this, I'm going to have shop HTML and then shop. And then here I will type about HTML and about link. Now below this, we're going to add some social media icons. We're going to use special icon styling from Font Awesome. If you go to the Font Awesome website, there's lots of instructions on how to add this, but we're going to just do it a very simple way. The first thing we're going to do is type li, then period, and we're going to use the Emmet shortcut. So we'll say nav item, then we'll put another period. We'll say social nav item. That way we can target these individually. And notice that it has 2 classes on it. Then we're going to add a link. So we'll type A, and then we're going to type where we want this to go. For this one's going to go to Twitter. So I'll type the Twitter, and then I'm going to put my profile page. And then for accessibility, we need an ARIA label for screen readers. So we're going to type ARIA label. And then we want to type the text that the screen reader will read. So we'll type link to Twitter. And then for the text, rather than saying Twitter, we can actually put an icon. So we can type I, and then we can type period. And for the class, we want to type FAB, period, and then FA-Twitter. And so you can manually type this out. Just using the Emmet shortcut can make that faster. We want to click back inside the bracket. Notice I'm between the quote and the bracket. Put a space, and then we're going to type ARIA hidden equals, and this is for accessibility. So this way the screen readers will ignore the icon. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and then I'll start the live server. You can see we have our image and no CSS, so everything is just really big. But down at the bottom there, you can see as a list item, we see the Twitter icon. So now what I'm going to do, I'll copy these lines and add the other social media icons. So I've added my Instagram profile, link to Instagram, and then I've changed the class of the icon to FA, Font Awesome -Instagram. So now I've added my LinkedIn profile, changed the ARIA label, link to LinkedIn, and then changed the Font Awesome icon to FA-LinkedIn. And then I added my GitHub profile because we're doing all this coding, so we should add references to our GitHub. You can put in any social media accounts you wish. And now if you look over at our live preview, we have those social media icons as list items in our nav menu. This is great. And they are linked. So if I click on Twitter, it goes to my Twitter profile. And I've proudly claimed that Twitter is a website. So that finishes up our nav bar. So now what we're going to do is add some content in our navigation. So this is going to, remember, this is the first landing page of our website. So we want to catch everyone's attention. We'll call it a section, and we're going to call it a hero with a class of hero text box. Inside this, we're going to have an H1 with a hero heading. We have an ocean, so I'm going to say creativity like an ocean wave. And then below that, I'm going to go ahead and add a paragraph and give it a class of hero text. And here I'll add just a little tagline. And if I save that, you'll see down below, we have that heading and the text. So right below that text, we're going to add another paragraph and just press P, no class. And then we're going to add a button. So we'll type button, period. And then we'll add a class of hero button. And then for this button, we're going to say view portfolio. And if you scroll down to the bottom, you can see we have a little button that says view portfolio. And then that finishes our header section for our landing page. Now what we want to do is add a footer. So we can type footer, and then we want to add some navigation, and it's going to be a little bit different than the main navigation, but what we can do is save a lot of time. We will copy the first parts here, and then inside the footer, we can paste them. Now notice that there's no closing nav tag, so I have to press enter and then close that tag. Close the UL tag and close the nav tag. And then if I save that, you'll notice everything is okay, right? And so now below we have Mutona Authenton and then our 3 items. But I don't want it to be in the same order in the footer, so I'm going to change up the order. So now I have another nav item, and I'm going to have this one go to index.html, and I'll change it to Mutona Authenton. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and delete that H1. And I'm going to change hero nav to footer nav. Now notice I still have the nav bar class, and then I have the footer nav. So that's an additional class, so I can style this one a little bit different. Down here on this nav item, I'm going to go ahead and add the class of logo and add the class of footer logo. That way I get all the styling for the logo class, and then I can add additional classes for footer logo. Then below the nav, we want to add a space for our social media icons. So we'll type section, then a period, and we'll type footer. So this is where we can put our social media icons. And again, rather than retyping all those social media icons, we can go ahead and get them from up here. So we can copy starting with this link to Twitter, and then come all the way down and end at this a link. And if I copy that, you're going to notice there's some errors because we still have these list items. We're not going to use a list for this. So we really just need for each one the A and the icon. So you can go ahead and then delete these LI ending tags and starting tags. Move that over so we have a little bit more space. Make sure each of these starts with an A, right? And then ends with an A, and it has the icon right in the middle there. And if I save that, then you'll see that I have not in a list form, but just the social media icons in line in the text right there. And then after the social media section, so the footer social, we want to add one more paragraph, and we'll type it P period. Then we'll give it a class footer copyright. And we'll say copyright. Then we're going to use the special HTML character and copy semicolon. And then we'll type 2020 and we'll save that. And then there is our copyright notification. So now this is all the HTML that we need for our landing page. Now it's up to the CSS to make this look good. As you can see, no matter what, we will still have our content even if the CSS doesn't load, but we want to make it more engaging. So we'll use CSS for that. So now what we want to do is go to our Styles CSS, and we're going to type in our basic styles. Since we're using multiple web pages, this style sheet will get a little bit longer than usual, so we want to use comments to keep track of our code and keep it organized. And if I save that, you'll notice that now our image is responsive and moves up. And we've added one new thing to our basic styles. We have video, because we want our videos to be responsive as well. And if you remember from previous videos when we introduced CSS, we don't want to repeat ourselves when it's not necessary. Sometimes we will repeat ourselves to make our code easier to understand. But remember here, I can put a comma and then video, and then I can delete this whole section, and then that saves me space in my CSS. So now we're going to put in our header navbar styles. And make sure you pay attention if you make a mistake. Here I have a colon instead of a semicolon. And if I do that, we have some things that change over in our live server. If you're more interested in how this navbar works, please see the previous video on Flexbox navbars. Although this navbar uses a few more techniques that are not covered in that previous video. This white space no wrap keeps the logo and different things from collapsing on a single line. So now we are really starting to get our styles to look correct. And remember, we're styling everything for mobile first. So it is for only mobile browsers. And then below, we will add styles for larger screens. So now our navigation works. And if we expand out, it doesn't look right because we still have to add our media queries. Before we add those media queries, we're going to continue styling everything for mobile first so we can really see how the mobile first design works. We're going to move this entire nav bar up on top of the image. And if we do that, we're going to have the nav bar not be black text. We want it to be white text. So to do that, we're going to only style parts of what we need to do. If you remember in the index.html, we had on line 21 here, we have navbar, but we also added this class hero nav. That means we can target any of the classes down here by putting hero nav in front of it in our CSS. So I'm going to put a comment. So this lets us know that we're using the navbar styles above, but we need to change some of them when it's on the hero nav. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the background color. So we won't notice that now because we had a background of white. You always want to have a background that is a contrasting color. So here what we're doing is we're putting hero nav and we're saying any logo link below that. And you can see that right here in Visual Studio Code is telling you what you're targeting with this. And then we're going to have this be a color of white. And if we do that, the logo now disappears. It's still there, but now it has a color of white. And we're going to do one more. We're going to put a comma here, and then we're going to type hero nav, then a space, the nav menu, and then all the A's in the nav menu. So now all that is white as well. But now what we want to do is we still have these borders. You see how we have these black borders here? We need to change the default. So first, we need to type hero nav and then nav menu and then the hover state, a hover, and we need to go border. So now when we hover, we get a white border. But the problem is we need to have a space. We don't want to have a black border on the top. Okay, so we can go ahead and fix that as well. So when they're just there, we want to actually have a clear border. So we'll type hero nav, then nav menu A, and we want to give it a border bottom, but we want to give it a transparent one. So I'll type border bottom, and then what we're going to do is we're going to type 1px solid, and then we're going to use RGBA. So remember, this is red, green, blue alpha channel. So we want it to have, it doesn't matter what colors we put here, but this will be a black border that is 0.0 opacity. Okay, so now we've prepared the changes we need for our hero header. Now let's go ahead and do some of the magic that's going to make this full screen image work. I'm going to put in a comment that says home page hero. So the first thing we're going to do is style the hero box. Let's go back and look at our index.html. If you look here, we have this header class hero box. This wraps all of our content. We're going to make a grid. And that means every child of this will be a grid item. So this will be a grid item, the entire nav will be a grid item, and then the entire text box will be a grid item. So we'll have 3 grid items in our hero box grid. So let's go ahead and style that. So I'll type hero box. The first thing we'll type is, of course, display grid. That won't change anything. We're going to give grid template columns 1FR. We want 1 column, and then grid. We just want 1 grid row also. Grid gap is default 0, but we can make sure explicitly setting it there. We want to align the content vertically in the center. And we want to justify the content left to right in the center. And then we want the items to align in the top or the start of their grid containers. And we need to put a height of 100%. And if we save that, everything stays the same. That's because we haven't told the children or the grid items what to do yet. So now let's start to do that. First, we're going to target the image. So we'll start with hero image box. We're going to give it a height of 100 viewport height. If I save that, now this image box, as you notice, see how all this content is pushed down? The image is still the same size, but the box that's holding the image becomes the size of the viewport. We'll add a max width of 100%, and we're also going to tell this to display grid. And then we're going to give it a grid. If you remember from before, this tells it to go all the way across. No matter how many grid columns there are, it'll go all the way across. And now this one, so now this will allow it to go where it needs to go. So now we have our image is still up at the top, but the box that's containing it is the whole viewport height. So we've said 100 of however tall our viewport height is. And if I change this, notice that everything is right below that as we go down. Now we need to make sure that the image fills up the entire viewport height or the hero image box container. To do that, we'll use the object fit property just like we did in our CSS grid galleries in the earlier video. I type hero img because that's the class. And I'm going to go ahead and add hero video now. Even though we haven't used video yet, we're going to at the end of the video. So I'm adding it now. We add width 100% and then height 100%. And if I save that, notice it gets stretched out. But what we want to do is press object fit cover. Now it keeps the same aspect ratio and fills up everything. Now let's style the hero text box. So now we have the text box is on top of the hero image here. And so if I save that now, we have our text box is on top of our image. So we have the grid column 1, and then we have the grid row, and then we said align it to itself, stay in the center of where we are. Add a little bit of padding to kick it off the side. And then even though it's on top of the image, we want to make sure it stays on top. So we're going to make a Z index of 10. So this is coming towards us 10 spaces, very similar to arranging items in Illustrator. And then we're aligning the text in the middle. So now we're going to style the actual text. So we have the hero heading. So this is the creativity like an ocean wave. So we'll increase the font size. We'll text transform to uppercase. And then we're going to make the color of the text white. Then we're going to do the hero text. So now that we have our hero text added, let's go ahead and put our nav bar up at the top. Remember, our nav bar is way down here. So we want to make sure that we get that up at the top. And we started doing that in our new hero nav. Remember, here we have our hero header nav bar changes. Well, we have to add a couple more things. So in hero nav, tell it to have grid column of 1, go all the way across. And then this is the important one. So now we're telling it to be inside that row. So now if you look, we have our nav bar is floating right at the top over our image, which is great. Make sure that there's no background so it's nice and clear. Want to align the content on the top. And then we're also going to give this a Z index of 10. But this is all a little bit hard to see. So what we need to do is add something that makes the image a little darker. And we can use a special CSS command for that. So if we go up in between hero image box and hero image, we can type So if you notice, we can type hero image box and then after, and then I just type this content hello, and you see that it actually added that to the HTML. So that's kind of crazy. We can use that to add things. We can even make it say hello world. And it says hello world, but we don't want it to have any content. So I'm going to delete that. What we want to do is add a background color, and we're going to use the RGBA, and then we're going to type 0, 0, 0, and then we're going to make it 0.6. And if I save that, you notice below here, we have all this transparent gray here. And also make sure that there's no space between your RGBA and this parentheses, otherwise you may not have any color show up. Now we need to position this up above. So the way we're going to do that is we'll type height 100% and save that. So now it's height 100%. We'll do width 100%, save, and then we're going to position it absolute. And then just to make sure that it's in the right spot when we move everything, we're going to go ahead and put top 0 and left 0. Those should be the default, but this guarantees that everything is in the right spot. So now we have this nice background that is behind the text, but in front of the image. Now remember that Z index that we did? If I delete that, so let's delete that on the text box. So if I delete this line, if I save that, notice how the text is now behind this. We don't want that. We want it to come forward. So there's two ways of doing this. We could make the after property go back or just bring the text forward. So I'm going to bring the text forward. So there we go. So now we have this nice image, and we can change the opacity. If we don't like how dark that looks, we can make it 5, make it a little bit brighter. We can even go 40% opacity. Maybe that's good enough for this particular image. That looks real nice. Now we have this ugly button at the bottom. So let's fix that button. So we type hero button. Why do we do that? Because if you remember in the HTML, when we made that button, we gave it a class of hero button right here on line 60. So let's add some styling to it. So we'll display inline block, and we'll add some padding of 0.75 rem and 2 rem. So remember, if we do this, this gives it the top and bottom will get 0.75 and the right and left will get 2. So if I do that, now my button's a little bigger. That looks nicer. Then we're going to have background none. So now it's a clear button, but it still has that weird drop shadow. Then I want to give it a color for the text of white. Okay, so that looks nicer. Then we're going to do the font size of 1.2 rem. Okay, so now it's a little bigger. I can read it. That's good. Give it a font weight of bold, even easier to read. Now let's give it a border. It does have a border, but it's this weird drop shadow border. So we're going to give it a border, and we're going to give it a 1-pix solid white. If I save that, you see how that looks a lot nicer now. And then I can give it a border radius. And that's up to you how much you want. And you notice now that the corners are nice and rounded over. And we're just going to give it a little bit margin on top to space it out. So we'll go margin. We'll give it 2 rems. And as you can see, that gives us a little bit of space between our nice text and our button. So let's give it a little action when we hover over, because it's not so exciting when I hover my mouse over that button right now. So what we'll do is we'll type hero button, and then we'll type hover. And then for hover, we're going to do transform. So now it's going to get 95% of the size. You see when I hover over the button now, it bounces down. So that's kind of nice looking. And then we can do one more. We can make the active state. So we can type hero button. So this is when you're actually clicking the button. Let's give it a background, RGBA, and let's go 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And then we'll do 0.3. So just a little bit of transparent gray. So then if I click on this, you can see it gets that gray. So it gives me, the user, a little indication that it's being used. So now we need to go ahead and style our footer. So if you look down here, some of our footer is styled already because it's using the nav bar styles, but our social media icons aren't looking so swell down there. So let's go ahead and style our footer styles. First, we're going to put a comment and we're going to say footer. So we want to go for the footer logo, white space, no wrap. This is just to make sure that this Mutona Authenton does not go onto 2 lines. We always want to keep those on 1 line. So then we can start styling these social icons. So how do we do that? Well, if we go to here and down in the footer, we can see we have a class of footer social. Then we have links. So we can style those by, let's just style the whole thing footer social, and let's display. If I display flex, now they are all flowing together. And if I justify the content center, well, now they're in the middle. So that's a good improvement. And then if I go padding, well, that gives us a little bit more space. That's kind of nice. And also, let's fix the footer copy right there. So we're going to say footer, we're going to do text align center. So if I do that, that just brings it over in the center. So that's nice. And then we're going to give some padding to the bottom of this, just to have a little white space at the bottom of the page. So we'll go padding, bottom, and we'll do 6 rem. So that's like 6 line heights. If I scroll down, I get that little extra room rather than just being at the bottom of the page. We also want to style the footer social links. So we'll type footer social A. So these are the links. We're going to give them a color of black instead of that blue. So now all my icons are black. That looks nice. And then we're going to give them some padding. So we'll say padding. So no padding on the top and bottom, and then 1 rem on the right and left. Great. So that spaces those out. But these are awfully small. So I'm going to go ahead and change those. If we go to the index.html, and we scroll down to where our icons are. You see our icons, they have these classes, FAB, FA Twitter, and you can read more about this on the Font Awesome website, all the different things that you can do with these. One of the things we can do is change the size. So right here, I can type FA3X, and if I save that, notice the Twitter icon is much better. On Instagram, I could type FA6X, and wow, Instagram is super huge. But I'm going to keep them all at 3X. I'm going to type FA3X as a different class. Great, and so now that looks a little bit easier to click when I'm looking at my website and looks a lot nicer. So this takes care of our mobile first. So if I'm on a cell phone, and it wouldn't be this tall, it'd probably be something like this. If I come on, load this on a cell phone, I can view my portfolio. I can click on all these links up here, and then I can scroll down to see other things. If we look here, though, we have an error. Notice that we have all of these lines here. We have all these lines. They're not supposed to be there the whole time. So we have a typo in our CSS. Let's go ahead and fix that so that isn't doing that like that. So is go to our nav menu, and it's going to be in the hero changes. So remember, we have our header hero navbar changes. So if you look here, this is the default styling from before when we have the white background. But if you notice on my particular line 114, I have border bottom 1-pic solid RGBA. Some of the things are more tolerant to spaces than others. So we can't have a space there. And if I press save, now we don't see those lines on the mobile first, but then when I hover over them, I get these nice lines that happen. So if you were following along exactly, you may have that mistake. So go ahead and fix it. So now our mobile first design is perfect. So now we have this beautiful image there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you two new things. I'm going to go ahead and make it a video. I'm going to swap it out for a video and then show you how you can put a background image that appears while the video loads, so you don't have to wait. If I go up to my index.html, and so what I want to do is instead of this image, I want to type video, and everything's going to be about the same, except I want to type video, because if you look at my files, in the video folder, I have ocean.mp4. So I need to change this JPEG to MP4. And then I'll delete this alt tag. And I don't want it to be hero image. I want it to be hero video. And then what I want to do is add a couple attributes. So we can say autoplay, muted to cancel the sound, and then we can say loop. And if I do that, now I have this beautiful video happening. But let's say that I'm on a slow internet connection, and I'll simulate that by just spelling ocean wrong. So I put a D there. And if I save that, well, now I don't get anything. And that's not very exciting. So what we want to do is have the video have a background image. And we can do that with CSS. So what I'm going to do is target this hero video. It has this class of hero video. If I go to the style CSS, and I'll go ahead and put this, we'll put it in the homepage hero area. And so let's put it down here, right below the hero image and hero video. So if I type hero video, I can give it a background. And so you can see that becomes black. That just knows that we're targeting that hero video. I can give it a background image, and I can type URL, and then I type ... and I tell it img ocean.jpg. And this should be in quotes. Save. So now I have this background image. Everything looks the same, except this is being loaded with the CSS. It's not in the HTML. Look, I have a video here. So what we want to do is, if you look, it's not exactly the same. You see how it's repeating? We have these two images repeating. So we want to say background, repeat, and we'll say no repeat. And if I save that, well, now it doesn't repeat, but I still have this black background. I don't want that. So why don't we do background size, and we'll do cover. Great. So now it's background size cover, but it still looks a little weird. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do background. So now, there we go. Now it's the center of the image. So this is what would load if you were on a slow connection. You would at least get the image of the ocean. And this is just the first frame of the video. So if it loaded this and then the video suddenly started playing, it wouldn't look weird. Now I can go back to my index. and I can change this to ocean. And when I save this, it'll simulate what happens when you load. So there you go. Now it reloaded the page and I have my video playing. Excellent. So now what we need to do is we have this great home page, and it doesn't look bad on a desktop. But if you look at this up here, this all gets a little funky. You know, we'd like to spread that out a bit more. And also this text is awfully small on a desktop. So we can add a few media queries to make that better. Let's go down to the bottom of our CSS. So now I'm going to type in a comment. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a media query. So we type @media, and then we're going to do min width because we're doing mobile first. And we're just going to type 600 pixels. So below 600 pixels, it'll get this nice mobile site. So then we type curly braces, and you got to remember that we need both these curly braces because this only applies to the things inside the curly braces. Okay, so let's go ahead and move our page so it's a little bit bigger. So this would definitely be affected by the 600 pixels. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll do nav bar. We'll give it a line height of 1.5 rem. And we're going to give the nav menu some padding. Now this is where we'll change how things look. So then we're going to target the nav items, and we'll give it a flex. And if we do that, now everything goes out onto one line like that. And so the next thing we can do is we can say hero nav. And so this is only targeting the navigation on the hero page. And we can say padding. So we'll add font size 4 rem to that. We want to add a line height so it doesn't collapse into itself. Creativity like an ocean wave. Go ahead and target the hero text box. So now we have some padding around the text box. So that also, now everything doesn't collapse when we have this up. So before it would collapse in, but now we have it nice. So now we have our Surf On with Matona Authorton's creative projects. I'm actually going to go ahead and make that 2 rem. Let's see what that looks like. Oh yeah, definitely a little bit bigger. That looks nice. And then we want to make sure we have a line height set in case we make a longer paragraph. So now we're going to fix the footer nav. Now this doesn't look terrible, which is great, but what I'd like to do is bring down the logo below the portfolio shop and about. So to do that, I'm going to target the footer nav. I'm going to give it a padding. So that just gives us a little space, and you could add more space. We could make that 2 rem if you wanted to. And so that gives us more space at the top there. And then now the footer logo is the next thing to target. So flex bases is how wide something is, how wide a flex object is. If you remember from the Flexbox video, I can do flex bases 100%. And what that does is it makes this Matona Authorton or the footer logo go all the way across the Flexbox. So now it lowers it down there, and that just looks a little bit nicer there. And you could space things out more if you wanted to, but that looks real nice. So if I land on the page now, I have it looking like this, and then I have this down here. But now what we need to do is worry about screens. What if the screen goes all the way across the page, right? So we want to kind of spread this out a little bit more, so we can do that. So we're going to add one more media query. So now we're going to add @media, 920 pixels. Normally on this media query, we put a max width for our body. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to say body, and then we're going to say max width of 1400 pixels. And if I do that and make my page really big, well, suddenly I don't have the full page. I want my normal website to be centered like this, but I don't want my full page landing page to be. So what I want to do after this, if you remember in the index.html, we put a class on the body, hero body. So what I can do is after this declaration, I can type hero body, and then I can say max width unset. So now it goes back to the default, and now we will have our image or video go all the way across the screen. So now we want to target the nav bar, so I'll type nav bar I'm going to justify the content, and this time I'm going to do space between. So now we have everything pushed out. So now the nav menu, we'll make it have a width of auto. Justify self, end. Give the logo just a little bit of margin. And we'll tell it to justify self. It should be there by default, but we want to make sure it is working with the space between. Making sure the hero nav stays 100%. And then the other thing we need to do is, now that we've done all those things to the nav bar, we need to change the footer nav to work on large screens. You notice how it's over here to the left. If we do justify content space evenly, then the footer nav will be like this, but then our top nav will be all pushed apart. And this is great. So now we have this beautiful landing page. We can click on View Portfolio. Once we make our portfolio page, we'll go to that, and everyone will want to see your work. So now that we have all of this set up, we have our nice mobile device, right? And then we have also our big screens, and this is a wonderful landing page. We have our footer, we have our links to our social media, and we have a button to go to our portfolio, a video, and a background image. Now it's time to commit our changes. So we'll click on source control, and we'll say set up homepage. Click check. So now we've synced everything locally, but now we need to click down here and commit our changes to GitHub. And what is great about this is, since we cloned our repository, our first repository, that's our username.github.io, we can just go to our homepage. So this is still the local page, but I should be able to go to mutonaauthenten.me, and it still says the hello world here, but soon it will update. And I can double check that by going to GitHub. I can log in. And then I want to go to my repositories, and you can see it has all these files here. So that means it's updated, and soon the actual page will be updated, and there we go. Now we have just on our domain name, so no need to have any other slashes. So this is really easy to give to somebody, and then they can see this wonderful portfolio page. And then in the next videos, we'll add our portfolio, shop, and about pages.